Hey everyone and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into a pivotal era in Indian history, the Post-Mauryan period. We're talking about big changes, new beginnings.
And it's not just about one empire falling, it's about so many new powers emerging
And
and
that's what makes it so fascinating. It's like watching a Game of Thrones play out in ancient India.
exactly. So we know the Mauryan Empire, that huge empire that unified so much of India, it started to decline.
Right, a mix of internal issues and external pressures. So then what? Who steps into that vacuum?
Well, picture this. Groups coming in from Central Asia, Western China, all trying to get a piece of the action.
Wow, so it's not just internal power struggles, there's a whole external dimension too.
It gets complicated, right? And then from within India, you have the rise of the Shingas. They were the first big dynasty to fill that Mauryan void.
The Shungas. Okay, so they're the new kids on the block, but where do we even begin with them?
Their founder, Pushyamitra Shinga, he's a great place to start. He was a bold leader, very ambitious.
And he didn't shy away from making a statement, did he?
Not at all. He assassinated the last Mauryan ruler. Just think about that for a second.
Talk about a power move. But he didn't just stop at taking the throne.
Oh, no. He was a brilliant military leader. He had to be, with all those threats, the Indo-Greeks pushing in from the northwest.
So constant battles, defending his territory, that's intense.
Oh, and this is a good one for those UPSC folks. Pushyamitra performed the Ashvamedha sacrifice. You know, that horse sacrifice.
Wait, really? Why is that such a big deal for the UPSC?
Legitimacy. He came to power through assassination, not the most traditional way, right? So performing this ancient ritual, it was a way to show everyone, hey, I'm the rightful ruler, this is how it's done. It's all about symbolism and power, the kind of stuff the UPSC loves to ask about.
I see. So it's not just about the ritual itself. It's about the message it sends.
Exactly. Pushyamitra was a smart cookie. But he wasn't just about warfare and power. He actually supported both Hinduism and Buddhism.
Interesting. So it's not a simple black and white picture of one religion dominating.
Not at all. The religious landscape was complex. Rulers had to play it carefully, keep everyone happy.
Balance. That seems to be a recurring theme here. But was it all just politics and war under the Shungas?
Yeah.
And any room for, say, some romance?
Well, let's talk about Agnimitra, one of Pushyamitra's successors. He wasn't quite the military star his father was, but he's famous for something else.
Oh, what's that?
He's the main character in Kalidasa's play Malvikagnimitra. You know, Kalidasa, the guy who wrote Shakuntala.
No way, that Kalidasa. So we're getting a glimpse into the personal lives of these rulers through literature.
Exactly, and it humanizes them, Agnimitra, he's portrayed as this love-struck king, head over heels for Princess Malvika. It shows they weren't just about conquering and ruling. They had feelings, desires.
I love that. It's like we're peeking behind the curtain of history. But let's not forget about their legacy, right? The Shungas left behind some pretty impressive stuff.
Oh, they did. When it comes to art and architecture, early Buddhist art, they were major patrons. And this stuff pops up all the time in UPSC art and culture questions. Like, take the Barhut Stupa. It was there before, from the Mauryan period, but the Shungas really went all out with it. Imagine these intricate sculptures carved in red sandstone, scenes from the Buddha's life, Jataka tales. It's the beginning of narrative art in Buddhism, using visuals to tell stories.
Wow, it sounds visually stunning. And wasn't there another stupa strategically placed on a major trade route?
You're thinking of the Sanchi Stupa, another Shunga-era masterpiece, right on the Dakshinapatha, that big trade route connecting North and South India.
So they're not just building religious monuments, they're also showcasing their power and influence.
Right. It's like a giant billboard saying, look at us, we're prosperous, we support the arts.
Smart move. But hold on, I thought the Shungas were all about promoting Hinduism. Now they're building Buddhist stupas.
Well, they weren't strictly Hindu, they were open to other influences too. Take the Heliodorus pillar, for example. Imagine this. A Greek ambassador dedicating a pillar to the Hindu god Vasudeva, right there during the Shunga reign. It's this fascinating mix of cultures and religions.
Whoa, a Greek ambassador honoring a Hindu god. That's wild. It really shows how interconnected the ancient world was.
It really does. Okay, so the Shungas had a pretty good run, but like most dynasties, they eventually met their match. That's where the Kanvas come in, and their story is pretty dramatic.
Oh, tell me more.
Their founder, Vasudeva Kanva, he was a minister, and he overthrew the last Shunga king.
Another power struggle. So what's the deal with the canvas? Were they as influential as the Shungas?
Well, they were interesting, especially because they were Brahmins, the priestly caste. They claimed descent from this ancient sage, Sabari. Gave them some serious religious cred.
Ah, so they're playing the legitimacy card, too.
Right. But their time in the spotlight, it was relatively short. They got overthrown by the Andhras, and that was it for their dynasty. This whole rise and fall of dynasties, it's a pattern you'll see a lot in ancient Indian history.
It's like a constant Game of Thrones. But were there any other important dynasties that popped up, maybe outside the traditional power centers?
Absolutely. We need to shift our focus eastward to Kalinga, which is modern-day Odisha. That region became a major player under the Chetty dynasty, their most famous ruler, King Kharavela.
King Caravello. All right, tell me about it. What makes him so special?
Well, the cool thing about Kharavela is that we have this inscription, the Hathigumpha inscription, carved right into the Udayagiri Hills. It's like a message from the past telling us all about his reign.
Wow, an inscription. What kind of stuff does it say?
It's a gold mine of information, written in Brahmi script, starts with the Jain Namakar mantra, so right away we know Kharavela was a devout Jain. It goes on to detail his military campaigns, his accomplishments, his efforts to spread Jainism. It's like reading his autobiography etched into the side of a mountain.
So not only was he a powerful king, he was actively promoting Jainism. I'm sensing a theme here. And speaking of Jainism, didn't they build some incredible cave architecture around this time?
You're thinking of the Udayagiri and Kandagiri caves, and you're right, they're totally connected to Jainism. These caves near Bhubaneswar, they're thought to have been carved out as homes for Jain monks. Natural and man-made caves all mixed together, and the artwork inside is just breathtaking, especially the Rana Gumpha cave, the sculptures there, there's something else.
Okay, so we've got stupas, a Greek-inspired pillar, and now these amazing Jain caves. Post-Mauryan India is like an explosion of artistic and architectural innovation. But I'm curious about the bigger picture. Beyond the politics and art, what was happening in society as a whole? Any big changes, transformations happening?
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge part of the UPSC syllabus, so listen up. One big trend was the resurgence of Brahmanism, especially under the Shungas. You see this revival of Vedic rituals, practices, things like that elaborate Ashvamedha sacrifice we talked about.
So a shift back to the traditional Brahmanical beliefs.
Yeah. But what about the other religions? Buddhism, Jainism, how did they fit in with all this change?
Right, good question. What happened to them?
Well, things get a bit complicated. Buddhism, it stuck around, but there are hints that there might have been some tension between Buddhism and Brahmanism. Some even say Prashamitra Shunga was hostile toward Buddhism, although historians still debate how true that is. As for Jainism, it kept flourishing, especially in places like Kalinga, with rulers like Kharavela supporting it.
So a mix of revival, tension, and continuing diversity. Sounds like a dynamic period. But what about social structures? Did the caste system play a big role?
Oh, it did. The Varna system, the fourfold caste system, it had a major revival, led to a much stricter social hierarchy. This is something to really understand for the UPSC because the Varna system has had a long-lasting impact on India. The Brahmins at the top, the priests, they enjoyed a lot of privilege. Then you have the Kshatriyas, the warriors, also in a powerful position. The Vaishyas, the merchants and traders, they continue to be important for the economy. And lastly, the Shudras, the laborers, they remain at the bottom.
So basically, traditional social hierarchies were reinforced. But what about women during this time? Did their role in society change at all?
Sadly, not much changed for women in terms of their social standing. They were mostly confined to domestic roles, not a lot of opportunities for education or public life. Texts from that time, like the Manusmriti, it laid out the social norms and expectations. It emphasized a woman's dependence on her father, her husband, and her sons. Not exactly empowering.
That's disheartening.
Yeah, but even with those rigid social structures, were there any signs of cultural integration or change happening at the grassroots level? You know, there were. One interesting thing was the rise of mixed castes. It suggests that different social groups were interacting, intermingling, maybe even marrying outside their caste.
So cracks in the system, so to speak.
Exactly. And we also see evidence of foreigners integrating into Indian society. Remember the Heliodorus pillar? That's a prime example of cultural exchange and integration.
Right. It seems like even within a rigid system, there's always room for change and interaction. But let's shift gears a bit. What about language and literature? What was happening in those areas?
This was Sanskrit's time to shine. It became even more widely used than during the Mauryan period, the language of scholars, literature, religious texts. We see tons of important Sanskrit works being produced. Definitely something to remember for the UPSC. Sanskrit literature is a big part of the syllabus.
So a golden age for Sanskrit. Any particular writers or works that stand out?
Definitely. Patanjali, he's a must-know. Renowned scholar, grammarian, you name it. His Mahabhasya, it's this massive commentary on Panini's grammar, incredibly influential. And then there's his Yoga Sutras, foundational texts for the philosophy and practice of yoga. These works are still studied and revered today, essential for anyone tackling the UPSC, especially for the literature and philosophy section.
Okay, so Patanjali, he's on the must-read list. But what about the language of everyday people? Was everyone speaking in Sanskrit?
While Sanskrit was prestigious, the everyday language was Prakrit. It's derived from Sanskrit, but with regional variations. People used it in daily life, and you even see it in literature, like in plays and popular entertainment.
So a fascinating linguistic mix. Sanskrit for the scholars and elites, Prakrit for the everyday folks. It seems like post-Mauryan India was a time of incredible intellectual and creative energy. But what about the economy? Was there a lot of trade going on?
Oh, tons. Post-Mauryan India saw trade, both internal and external, just explode. Internally, you had these two major trade routes. The Uttarapatha, connecting the north and east to the northwest, and the Dakshinapatha, linking the peninsula to the north and west. These routes were like the arteries of India, pumping goods and ideas throughout the subcontinent.
So a thriving internal trade network. But what about international trade, with India connected to the rest of the world?
Absolutely. And here's a key factor. The discovery of the monsoon winds. Indian sailors figured out how to use these winds to sail across the Indian Ocean. It opened up new trade routes to the west, especially to the Roman Empire.
That's huge. So Indian merchants were sailing all the way to Rome. What were they trading?
Think spices, textiles, precious stones, all highly prized in Rome. And in return, they brought back Roman gold, silver, luxury goods. This maritime trade with Rome, it had a massive impact on the Indian economy, bringing in wealth and connecting India to the wider world. This economic exchange is something to remember for the UPSC. It shows India as a major player in the ancient global trade network.
Wow. Post-Mauryan India was truly a global player, connected to the mighty Roman Empire. It's incredible how much change and dynamism we see in this period. Political upheavals, artistic innovations, flourishing trade. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But don't worry, we'll unpack it all bit by bit. Coming up next, we'll explore the lives of everyday people, how trade shaped Indian society, and the rise of new religious and philosophical movements. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into post-Mauryan India. Last time we were exploring the political landscape, the rise of new dynasties, those impressive architectural achievements. Now let's shift gears a bit.
Yeah, let's zoom in on the lives of everyday people.
Exactly. What was life like for the average person in post-Mauryan India? Their daily routines, challenges, joys, all that.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the kings and empires, but I want to know what it was like to actually live in that time.
Well, think of it this way. Agriculture, it was still the backbone of the economy.
So still largely an agrarian society.
Most people lived in rural areas, their lives revolving around farming, the seasons, the monsoons, that connection to nature. It must have been so different from our lives today.
Right. But alongside agriculture, crafts and trade were still important too. You had skilled artisans making all sorts of goods, textiles, pottery, metalwork, jewelry. They supplied local markets, but also those long-distance trade routes we talked about.
So a mix of rural and urban life with a vibrant artisan class.
Exactly. Now think about social life back then. No TV, no internet. How did people entertain themselves?
Good question. What did they do for fun?
Music and dance were huge. And theatrical performances, too. Remember Kalidasa's play Malvikanimitra? That gives us a glimpse into the kind of entertainment people enjoyed. And of course, public gatherings, festivals, religious celebrations, those were all opportunities to socialize and have a good time.
It's amazing how some things never change, right? The human need for connection and entertainment.
It's timeless. But let's go back to the economy for a minute. We talked about those trade routes, but what was the overall economic climate like?
Yeah, was it a good time to be alive, economically speaking?
The evidence suggests that post-Mauryan India was relatively stable and prosperous. Trade played a big role, both within India and with the outside world, especially that trade with Rome after the discovery of the monsoon winds.
Ah, yes, those winds of fortune. But how did all this trade affect Indian society as a whole?
It had a huge impact. Think about all that Roman gold and silver flowing into India. It's fascinating, isn't it? Roman coins circulating in Indian markets.
It's like a tangible link to the past, imagining those coins changing hands.
Right. And this influx of wealth, it led to the growth of cities, the rise of a wealthy merchant class. It even influenced art, architecture, religious practices. It rippled through every aspect of society.
It really shows how interconnected the ancient world was.
It does. And it's not just about economics. We see cultural exchanges too. Roman art and architecture influenced Indian styles, especially in the Gandhara school, which flourished in northwestern India.
So a fusion of East and West in the art world?
Precisely. They blended Indian and Greco-Roman elements, creating this unique style.
I love that. Are there any other areas where we see Roman influence?
Even in coinage, Indian rulers started incorporating Roman imagery and designs into their coins, like they were trying to align themselves with Roman aesthetics, Roman prestige.
Wow, so that interconnectedness really went deep.
It did. But let's not forget about the internal dynamics within Indian culture. We've talked about Brahmanism, Buddhism, Jainism. Were there any new religious or philosophical movements popping up?
Yeah, was there anything new on the religious scene?
One of the most important developments was the rise of the Bhagavata cult. It focused on the worship of Krishna, emphasizing devotion, a personal connection with the deity.
So a more personal, experiential approach to religion.
Exactly. And it became hugely popular throughout India. The Bhagavad Gita, that sacred text that's part of the Mahabharata, it became a cornerstone of this movement, offering insights into spirituality, ethics, the nature of reality. It resonated with people on a deep level.
A new religious movement with a focus on individual experience. That's fascinating. But with all these different religions and philosophies swirling around, how did they all manage to coexist?
That's a great question. There were definitely times of tension, even conflict, between different groups.
Yeah, that's bound to happen when you have such diversity of beliefs.
Of course. But what's remarkable about post-Mauryan India is this overall atmosphere of tolerance and pluralism. You see rulers like Pushyamitra Shunga supporting both Hinduism and Buddhism. And in many places, different religious communities lived side by side, exchanging ideas, sometimes even influencing each other's practices.
That's an important point. It challenges that image of ancient India as having one dominant religion.
Exactly. It was a tapestry of different faiths and philosophies, interacting, coexisting, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes with friction, but always adding to the richness of Indian culture.
It's a reminder that India has always been incredibly diverse. Not just geographically and linguistically, but also in its beliefs and worldviews.
That diversity has shaped India's identity in profound ways, both for good and bad. Okay, let's move on to social structures again. We talked about that rigid Varna system before, but were there any changes or challenges to that system during this time?
Yeah, was there any pushback against that strict social hierarchy?
Well, the Varna system was still very powerful, but there were definitely signs of change and flexibility.
Right. Like what?
The growth of trade and commerce led to new occupational groups and guilds, and sometimes these challenged traditional caste boundaries. Plus, we see the emergence of mixed castes, which suggests intermarriage and some degree of social mobility.
So it wasn't completely rigid.
Not at all. The system was evolving, adapting to new economic and social realities. Now, what about the role of women? Did things change for them during this period?
Yeah, were there any improvements in their status?
Unfortunately, there weren't any major changes in terms of education or public life for women. However, there were some notable exceptions.
Tell me more.
We see women participating in religious life, as nuns in Buddhist and Jain orders, as devotees in the Bhagavata cult. And some women even excelled in the arts. There's Mujarakshasa, a poetess whose work has survived.
So even within a patriarchal system, women found ways to express themselves, make their mark.
Exactly. It's inspiring, isn't it? Okay, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm just struck by how dynamic and complex post-Mauryan India was. Political upheavals, economic growth, cultural exchanges, new religious and philosophical ideas. It's mind-boggling.
It's like a kaleidoscope of change and innovation. It makes you realize how much we can learn from these ancient societies.
It really does. And remember, this period lays the foundation for one of the most glorious chapters in Indian history, the Gupta Empire.
The Gupta Empire. Now that's a story I'm eager to hear. Stay tuned, everyone, as we journey into the golden age of ancient India. Welcome back, everyone. We're about to step into what many call the golden age of ancient India, the Gupta Empire. It's a period of incredible achievements in art, science, literature, you name it. A fitting grand finale to our exploration of post-Mauryan India.
It's amazing how the Guptas, starting from, pretty humble beginnings, built this powerful, influential empire.
Yeah, their story is all about ambition, strategy, and a bit of luck, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So let's back up a bit. How did they even come to power? Were they just another dynasty emerging from the chaos after the canvas?
Yeah, fill us in on the backstory.
Well, the Guptas, they weren't from one of those big, well-known families. They came from a lesser-known background in northern India, around present-day Uttar Pradesh. It's a bit unclear exactly where they came from, but they started as a local power in the Ganges Valley. Their founder, Sri Gupta, wasn't a major player, but his successors, they had big dreams.
Okay, so humble beginnings but big ambitions. Which Gupta ruler really put them on the map? Who made them emperors?
That would be Chandragupta I, who came to power in the early 4th century CE. He was a brilliant strategist and diplomat, making alliances to consolidate his power.
Smart move. Alliances are key in those power struggles.
Right. One of his most significant moves was marrying Kumara Devi, a princess from the powerful Licchavi clan.
Oh, a strategic marriage. Those always make things interesting.
It was a power move, no doubt. It gave him access to resources, political support, all that.
So, Chandragupta, I knew how to play the game, but I'm guessing he wasn't just relying on marriage alliances. What about his military achievements?
Oh, he was a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. He expanded the Gupta Empire significantly, conquering territories in north and central India. He even took the title Maharajasiraja, meaning King of Kings.
King of Kings, that's a pretty bold statement.
It was a clear sign of his imperial ambitions, but it was his son, Samudragupta, who really took the Gupta Empire to its peak.
Samudragupta, I've heard that name before. He's considered the greatest Gupta ruler, right?
Exactly, and for good reason. Imagine this. A military genius leading successful campaigns across much of northern and parts of southern India. He even launched a military expedition down the eastern coast.
Wow, so the Gupta army was a force to be reckoned with under his leadership.
Oh, absolutely. But Samudragupta wasn't just a warrior, he was also a patron of the arts, a scholar himself. Inscriptions describe him as a skilled poet and musician, known for being generous to learned men and artists.
So a warrior king with a refined side. I like it. And didn't he also revive that grand old tradition, the Ashvamedha sacrifice, just like Pushpamitra Shringa did way back when?
You're right. Samudragupta, ambitious as he was, chose to revive this ancient ritual. It was a powerful spectacle, reinforcing his authority and connecting him to the glorious past. Remember, for the UPSC, understanding those rituals, their political implications, it's all important.
Got it. So Samudragupta, conqueror, patron of the arts, master of symbolism. What a legacy. But what about his successors? Did they manage to hold on to this vast empire he built?
One of his successors, Chandragupta II, also known as Vikramaditya, continued the expansion westward, defeating the Shaka rulers. His reign is considered a high point of the Gupta Empire, a true golden age.
Ah, the golden age. What made Chandragupta II's reign so special? Paint us a picture.
Think peace, prosperity, art, science, literature, all flourishing. It was like ancient India's Renaissance, centuries before Europe's.
So a time of incredible creativity and intellectual ferment.
Exactly. His court was home to the 9 gems, 9 brilliant scholars who excelled in various fields.
9 gems. That sounds impressive. Tell me about them.
Well, there was Kalidasa, the legendary playwright and poet we've talked about, and Varhamihira, the astronomer and mathematician, Amarasimha, the lexicographer who compiled a thesaurus of Sanskrit, and Dhanvantari, the physician considered the father of Ayurveda.
Wow, what a lineup. It was a gathering of some of the greatest minds of ancient India.
It truly was a golden age, a time of unparalleled intellectual brilliance. But was it really a golden age for everyone, or just the elites?
Yeah, good question. Did the average person benefit from all this prosperity?
Life definitely varied depending on social status, but overall, the Gupta era was a time of relative peace and prosperity for many. The stable political environment, the flourishing economy, it created opportunities for people. We see increased agricultural production, thriving trade networks, a growing urban population.
Sounds like a good time to be alive in ancient India. But how do they govern such a vast and diverse empire? What was their administrative system like?
The Guptas were known for their efficient and centralized administration. Think of them as master organizers. They had a well-structured bureaucracy with officials at different levels responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining law and order, overseeing public works. They also had a strong military, keeping the empire safe and protecting trade routes.
So a well-organized and efficient government. What about their legal system? Was it harsh or fair?
From what we know, the Guptas had a relatively humane legal system. They emphasized dharma, the moral and ethical principles of ancient India. Punishments were usually proportionate to the crime, and there were options for appeals and royal pardons.
So a system that aimed for justice and balance. Now let's talk religion. Were they tolerant of different faiths, or did they favor one over others?
The Guptas were primarily Hindu rulers and actively promoted Hinduism, but they were also tolerant of other faiths, like Buddhism and Jainism. We see Gupta kings granting land and patronage to Buddhist monasteries and Jain temples.
That's really interesting. So they promoted their own religion, but allowed others to practice freely. That kind of religious tolerance is pretty remarkable, especially for that time period. Okay, let's move on to art and architecture. Did the Guptas leave behind any great monuments or masterpieces?
The Gupta period is considered a high point in Indian art and architecture. This is when the iconic temple architecture of India starts to take shape.
Oh, so the Guptas were temple builders.
They were master builders. They constructed these magnificent temples dedicated to Hindu deities like Vishnu and Shiva.
Are there any specific temples that stand out?
Some of the most famous include the Dashavatara temple at Deoghar, the Parvati temple at Nachnakuthara, and the brick temple at Bittargaon. These temples are more than just religious buildings. They're works of art showcasing the architectural brilliance of the Gupta period. Intricate carvings, soaring towers, harmonious proportions, the whole package.
They sound incredible. But Gupta art wasn't just about temples, was it? What about other art forms?
Absolutely. The Gupta period saw sculpture, painting, and metalwork flourishing. Gupta sculptures are especially renowned. They're incredibly graceful and naturalistic with exquisite detail. They depict all sorts of subjects, Hindu deities, scenes from everyday life. There's a sense of serenity and harmony in these works.
It's amazing to think about those artists, their skill and creativity, and how their work has survived for centuries. But what about intellectual pursuits? We talked about the 9 gems earlier, but was there a wider culture of learning and scholarship?
Oh, absolutely. The Gupta period was a time of intense intellectual activity. Universities like Nalanda and Taxila thrived, drawing students from all across India and even from neighboring countries. These were centers of knowledge where scholars debated, researched, and passed on ancient wisdom to new generations. For those preparing for the UPSC, remember, the Gupta period's contributions to education are super important.
A true golden age for knowledge. But, like all golden ages, the Gupta era eventually had to end. What led to their decline?
The Gupta Empire started facing challenges towards the end of the 5th century, early 6th century CE. Internal rebellions weakened their control over their more distant provinces. And they also faced new invasions from Central Asia, particularly from the Hunas, who were related to the Huns that were causing trouble in Europe around the same time.
So the classic combo of internal strife and external pressures. It's a story we've seen play out time and again throughout history. But what about their legacy? What impact did the Guptas have on India?
Their impact was huge. They're remembered for a reason, you know. The Guptas gave India a model of centralized administration, and that influenced later empires. They fostered learning and scholarship, helping to preserve ancient knowledge, and they created some of the most iconic works of Indian art and architecture. Their legacy lives on.
It's a reminder that even mighty empires eventually fall. But the ideas, the knowledge, the art they fostered can endure for centuries. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into post-Mauryan India. We've covered a lot of ground: the fall of empires, the rise of new dynasties, cultural clashes, the flourishing of art, religion, and, of course, the golden age of the Guptas. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And remember, studying history isn't just about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world, the legacies of those who came before us. It's about connecting with the past.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into post-Mauryan India. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.